Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to another trip down history lane, where we uncover the hilariously grim realities of the past. Tonight, we're strapping on our imaginary corsets and diving headfirst into the utterly bonkers world of Tudor women. Forget the romantic portraits and fancy gowns from those TV shows. The truth is, you probably wouldn't survive a month in one of those outfits without a severe case of the vapours and an impromptu appendectomy from your whalebone stays. Before we get comfy, or more accurately, before you realise how uncomfortable life used to be, do me a quick favour. Like this video and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really helps more people find this little corner of historical shenanigans. And I'm always curious. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. All right, dim the lights, maybe grab a cup of tea or something stronger. You might need it. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1535. The good news, you're alive. Give yourself a pat on the back. You've successfully navigated the perilous waters of medieval childhood diseases, which is a triumph in itself. The bad news, you're a woman in Tudor England, which means your existence falls somewhere between property and decoration, depending on your social class, and probably a very tired beast of burden. Your bed is a straw-stuffed mattress that doubles as an insect sanctuary. There's no memory foam, no fluffy pillows, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last Christmas, and now smells like a pungent combination of sweat, wood smoke, and whatever your husband, God bless his smelly socks, dragged in last night. You blink awake as church bells clang in the distance. It's the Tudor version of an alarm clock, only louder, more persistent, and with a side order of religious obligation that reminds you your soul is probably already damned. Your home, if you're among the common folk, is a timber-framed dwelling with one room, a dirt floor, and that special open concept design where your entire family, your chickens, and at least 3 types of rodents all share the same delightful living space. The smell. Oh, it's a fragrant symphony. A subtle blend of yesterday's pottage, which is basically gruel but sounds fancier, human waste from the chamber pot in the corner, and the distinct aroma of wet wool. Because in Tudor England, it's always somehow damp, and everyone smells a bit like a well-used sheep. Scented candles haven't been invented, and even if they had been, they'd just be another fire hazard in your tinderbox home. You try to stretch, but immediately regret it, because your back aches from yesterday's endless chores. You're 32 years old, which in Tudor terms is practically ancient for a woman. You've survived at least 6 pregnancies, birthed maybe 3 live children. The rest are, well, elsewhere. And your body feels like it's been through a jousting tournament. Getting out of bed is a gamble. The floor is cold, probably wet from last night's rain, which leaks through the thatched roof during every storm. Your bare feet are calloused from years without proper shoes, making them your only defense against the splinters, nails, and whatever your children dropped on the floor before bed. Oh, and privacy. What's that? Your entire family, husband, children, maybe even a servant if you're lucky enough to have one, are all waking up in the same space. There's no bedroom, no bathroom, no me time. Just communal everything, including the charming sounds of bodily functions. Even your thoughts don't feel entirely your own in a society where women's opinions are about as welcome as the plague. And this, dear listener, is just how your day starts. It only gets more exciting and more backbreaking from here. So, you've managed to drag yourself out of your Tudor bed of despair. Congrats. Now your real job begins. The one that will break your back, chafe your hands raw, and never, ever pay you a single penny. Because being a woman in Tudor England isn't a gender. It's an unpaid, 24-hour occupation. Your morning routine makes modern working mothers look like they're on permanent vacation in Barbados. First, you need to revive last night's fire or start a new one. No matches, no lighters, just a tinderbox, some flint, and a fervent prayer that it catches before everyone freezes to death. The fire isn't just for warmth. It's your stove, your water heater, and pretty much your only piece of technology. Next, you'll need to prepare breakfast for the household. Hope you like pottage. This gloppy, bland porridge, made from whatever grains and vegetables you have on hand, will be a staple of your diet. You'll cook it in the same pot you've been using for years, suspended over the fire on an iron hook. If your family is prosperous, maybe there's a bit of salted meat or a precious egg to add to the mix. If not, well, oats and water make a meal too. Technically speaking, your daily chores read like a medieval marathon. You'll milk the cow, if you have one, feed the chickens, collect eggs, sweep the floor with a bundle of twigs, no Dyson vacuum here, empty chamber pots, fetch water from the well or river, wash clothes by beating them on rocks. Soap is an expensive luxury. Spin wool, weave cloth, mend garments, make candles, brew ale, churn butter, make cheese, preserve food, tend the garden, and prepare more meals. And unlike your husband, who might take breaks, chat with friends at the local alehouse, or have specific working hours, your labour never ends. Dawn to dusk, and sometimes beyond, you work. Your hands are perpetually chapped, your back chronically sore, your arms muscled from constant lifting, carrying and wringing. If you're a woman of higher status, you don't escape labour. It just takes different forms. You'll manage servants, oversee the household accounts, preserve your family's social standing through careful etiquette, which involves a lot of stiff curtsying and pretending to enjoy terrible poetry. Produce heirs, we'll get to that joy later, and maintain a spotless reputation. Less physical labour, perhaps, but the mental burden is crushing. The worst part? All this backbreaking work is simply expected. No one thanks you. No one notices, unless you fail to do it. The Tudor household doesn't function without women's labour, yet that labour is invisible, taken for granted as natural as breathing. Your husband works his trade or tends his fields, and comes home expecting dinner on the table. Your children need constant attention. Your in-laws judge your housekeeping abilities. The church demands your piety and submission. And somewhere in all of this, you're supposed to find time to preserve your feminine virtue, which seems like an impossible feat when you're elbow deep in laundry water. So, you grip your broom, ignore the blisters, and keep sweeping, because in Tudor England, a woman's work isn't just never done. It's the foundation that the entire society is built upon, even while that same society tells you it's worthless. Now that you're thoroughly exhausted just thinking about your daily chores, let's talk about what you're wearing while performing this endless labour. Because Tudor fashion wasn't just uncomfortable, it was actively trying to kill you. If you're a common woman, your wardrobe consists of a linen shift. Your underwear, basically. A kirtle, a simple dress. Maybe an overgown, if you're slightly prosperous. An apron, a cap to cover your hair, because showing your hair is apparently scandalous. And possibly a cloak, if weather demands it. Everything is made from wool or linen, scratchy, heavy, and difficult to clean. Your clothes aren't just uncomfortable. They're a walking fire hazard. Those long skirts trailing near the open hearth. Perfect for catching stray embers. More than a few women and their voluminous garments went up in flames while cooking. Who needs safety when you can have modesty, right? But if you think common women had it bad, wait until you hear about the fashion requirements for noble ladies. Their clothing wasn't just garments. It was architectural engineering with a side of torture. Let's start with the foundations. First, a linen shift, then a stiffened kirtle. Next comes the pièce de résistance, the corset, or pair of bodies, as they called it. This isn't your cute Victorian waist cincher. It's a brutally rigid contraption, made from layers of linen stiffened with paste and whalebone. It compresses your rib cage, pushes your breasts up to your chin, and makes breathing optional rather than necessary. Trying to sit down in one is a geometrical challenge requiring advanced mathematics. Next, the farthingale, a framework of hoops that makes your skirt stick out like a walking bell. It's heavy, it's cumbersome. Doorways become your nemesis. Staircases are death traps. Then comes layer upon layer of rich fabric. Velvet, damask, silk, brocade. All gloriously beautiful and heavier than a small child. A noblewoman's outfit could weigh up to 15 pounds, all hanging from her compressed waist and shoulders. The sleeves are detachable, and often so heavily embroidered they could stand up on their own. The neckline, depending on the decade and the current monarch's preference, might plunge dangerously low or rise up to your ears with a supportive framework called a partlet. On your head, a French hood or gable headdress, both requiring your hair to be pulled back so tightly it gives you a perpetual facelift. Many noblewomen experienced traction alopecia from their hairstyles, going bald at the temples and hairline. But beauty is pain, as they say. And a Tudor woman's beauty belonged not to herself, but to her family's status. Speaking of beauty, hope you like lead poisoning. The ideal Tudor complexion was pale to the point of translucence, symbolizing a life of leisure indoors, as opposed to the tanned skin of working women. To achieve this deathly pallor, women applied ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar. Yes, actual lead, the same toxic metal we now carefully remove from paint and gasoline. Tudor women were smearing it directly onto their largest organ. This potent poison would be absorbed through the skin, causing everything from tooth loss to neurological damage and infertility. But the beautiful corpse look wouldn't be complete without those blood-red cheeks and lips. For this, women turned to vermilion, mercuric sulfide, or red ochre, iron oxide, mixed with beeswax. Mercury poisoning added tremors, psychosis, and drooling to the lead poisoning symptoms you were already enjoying. What price beauty? Your teeth going black from all these heavy metals. No problem. Black teeth were actually fashionable during parts of the Tudor period, as they signalled you could afford sugar, a luxury import. Queen Elizabeth herself had teeth so blackened from sugar that foreign ambassadors reported they could barely understand her speech. And don't forget the final touch, pomanders and perfumes to mask your body odour. Because bathing was considered dangerous, as opening your pores might let in disease. Most people bathed rarely, perhaps a few times a year at most, instead relying on regularly changing their linen undergarments to stay clean. So, there you have it, Tudor women's fashion. Beautiful, elaborate, and slowly killing you through constriction, chemical poisoning, and fire hazards. But at least you looked good for your husband, which is really all that matters in Tudor England, isn't it? Let's discuss the cornerstone of a Tudor woman's existence: marriage. It wasn't just a relationship, it was a business transaction, a political alliance, and your entire economic survival plan rolled into one. First, let's clear up a misconception, that romantic notion of marrying for love. File that under things that almost never happened in Tudor England. Marriage was an economic and social contract between families. The bride herself was essentially a commodity, being transferred from father to husband, bringing strategic advantages like land, money, or social connections. For common folk, marriages were slightly less calculated, but still primarily practical arrangements. You needed a partner with complementary skills to survive. A tanner needed a wife who could help with the lighter aspects of the trade while managing the household. A farmer needed someone who could handle the dairy and poultry while bearing children to provide future labour. Your consent to marriage was technically required by church law, but consent had a rather flexible definition. Family pressure, limited options, and the stark reality that an unmarried woman had few paths to economic survival meant your yes was often your only viable option. The marriage age was horrifying by modern standards. While most common women married in their mid to late teens, noble girls could be betrothed as young as 2 or 3 years old and married off as soon as they hit puberty. Margaret Beaufort, Henry VII's mother, was married at 12 and gave birth to the future king at 13, a traumatic delivery that damaged her body so severely she never bore another child. Once married, you legally ceased to exist as an independent entity. Under the doctrine of coverture, your legal identity was absorbed into your husband's. You couldn't own property independently, sign contracts, keep your own wages, or make legal decisions. Your husband controlled everything you owned, including inheritances or gifts specifically given to you. Your body wasn't your own either. Sexual submission was your marital duty, refusing your husband's advances. That was grounds for church intervention. Rape within marriage wasn't a concept the Tudors recognized. Your consent was implied by your marriage vows, and you'd better produce children quickly, preferably sons, or your value as a wife would be questioned. Domestic violence was not just tolerated, but expected as a form of necessary correction. A husband had the legal right to beat his wife moderately to maintain household discipline. The popular rule of thumb allegedly originated from the acceptable width of a stick a man could use to beat his wife, thin enough not to cause permanent damage. How considerate. Divorce as we know it didn't exist. You could seek an annulment if you could prove the marriage was invalid from the start. Impotence, close blood relation, or pre-contract, prior engagement were valid grounds. But this was extremely rare, and usually available only to the wealthy and powerful. Just ask Henry VIII how complicated it was, and he was the king. A more common escape was separation from bed and board, granted by ecclesiastical courts. But this didn't allow remarriage, and often left women destitute. Most women simply endured unhappy marriages because the alternatives were worse. Death was the most reliable way out of a bad marriage. And with disease, childbirth complications, and workplace hazards, it wasn't an uncommon exit. Widowhood, ironically, was one of the few states in which a Tudor woman gained some legal autonomy, able to own property and run businesses independently. Some widows enjoyed their newfound freedom so much they refused to remarry despite social pressure. But for many, economic necessity forced them back into the marriage market quickly. A widow with property was a hot commodity, and the cycle would begin again. So there you have it, Tudor marriage, where your husband was your lord, your body was his property, and your best hope for independence was his timely death. Not exactly the fairy tale, till death do us part, that modern brides envision. If marriage was a woman's duty, childbirth was her destiny, and potentially her death sentence. In Tudor England, creating new life often meant risking your own, transforming what should be joyful into something closer to Russian roulette with your reproductive organs. Your pregnancy journey begins with zero prenatal care. No ultrasounds, no fetal monitoring, not even a basic understanding of embryonic development. The Tudor explanation for pregnancy was based on the ancient Greek theory of humus, bodily fluids that needed to be in balance. Your growing belly was seen as an excess of blood that couldn't be expelled through menstruation. During pregnancy, you'd follow bizarre dietary restriction and old wives' tales. Cravings were believed to be the baby communicating its needs, and failing to satisfy them might result in birthmarks. Looking at a rabbit might give your child a hair lip. Reaching above your head could strangle the baby with its umbilical cord. Science wasn't exactly advanced. As your due date approached, you'd enter confinement, withdrawing from public life to prepare for birth. If you were wealthy, this meant a lavishly decorated birthing chamber with the windows sealed. Fresh air was considered dangerous, and every crack stuffed with cloth to create a womb-like darkness. If you were common, you simply continued working until contractions made it impossible. When labour began, your fate rested in the hands of midwives, women whose knowledge was passed down through generations rather than formal medical training. Some were skilled and experienced, others not so much. No male doctors attended births unless things went catastrophically wrong. The female reproductive system was considered too mysterious and shameful for male eyes. The birthing room was women-only territory. Your female relatives, neighbours, and the midwife would surround you, offering encouragement, herbal remedies, and prayers. Men, including your husband, waited elsewhere, probably drinking to calm their nerves or celebrating prematurely. Pain management. Hope you like chanting and herbal teas, because that's about it. No epidurals, no nitrous oxide, not even reliable opium preparations. You'd be offered various folk remedies. Eagle stones, tied to your thigh, rose water to sip, or a piece of jasper to clutch. For particularly difficult labours, you might be given a groaning malt, strong ale to take the edge off. Some women bit on sticks or leather straps to avoid screaming, which was thought to waste energy needed for pushing. Childbirth tools were rudimentary and terrifying. If things went wrong, the midwife might reach for iron hooks or crochets designed to extract a baby, often already dead, piece by piece. Caesarean sections existed, but were performed only when the mother was dead or dying, as a last-ditch effort to save the child for baptism. Surviving such emergency surgery was virtually unheard of. The statistics were grim. somewhere between 1 to 4% of births ended with the mother's death, figures that rose dramatically during times of famine or disease. Considering most women went through this gauntlet 6 to 10 times during their reproductive years, the cumulative risk was substantial. By some estimates, 20% of women died from pregnancy or childbirth-related causes during their lifetime. Common killers included hemorrhage, infection, puerperal fever, or childbed fever, eclampsia, obstructed labor, and retained placenta. Without antibiotics, sterile conditions, or blood transfusions, complications that would be manageable today were often fatal. Even if you survived the birth, infection in the following days could still claim you. If you made it through alive, there was no recovery period. Common women were expected to be back to full household duties within days. Queen Elizabeth of York, Henry VIII's mother, attended her daughter's christening just 3 days after giving birth, then died 9 days later from postpartum complications. Your newborn's survival was equally precarious. Infant mortality hovered around 30% in the first year of life. Many women experienced the heartbreak of losing multiple children. Those who survived might be handed off to wet nurses if you were wealthy, or strapped to your body as you returned to work if you weren't. And the cycle would begin again almost immediately. Without effective contraception, you could become pregnant again within weeks of giving birth. Many women were perpetually pregnant or nursing for 20 years of their adult lives, their bodies never fully recovering between pregnancies. No wonder many Tudor women approached childbirth with a mixture of religious fatalism and practical preparation. Many wrote wills before giving birth and made arrangements for their children in case they didn't survive. Childbirth wasn't just another life event. It was a near-death experience that every woman was expected to endure repeatedly. So, the next time you see a Tudor family portrait with a dozen children standing in a row, remember the woman who risked death to bring each one into the world, and the unknown number who didn't survive to be painted. If you're a woman in Tudor England hoping to expand your mind beyond recipes and Bible verses, I have some bad news for you. Your educational opportunities are about as limited as your legal rights, which is to say, practically non-existent for most. Let's start with the basics. Literacy. If you're a common woman, there's a good chance you can't read at all. Education for common folk was spotty at best, and what little existed was primarily reserved for boys. You might learn basic household arithmetic, enough to manage supplies and not get cheated at the market. But formal reading instruction? Unlikely. Even if your family could afford to send a child to a local parish school, they'd probably choose your brother. After all, he's the one who might need to sign contracts or read legal documents someday. You just need to recognize herbs and count eggs, right? If you're the daughter of a merchant or yeoman farmer, your prospects improve slightly. You might receive some rudimentary education, enough to read prayer books, write simple letters, and assist with the family business. However, this education would still be heavily focused on preparing you for your ultimate destiny, managing a household. For the tiny percentage of women born into nobility, education could be more substantial, but with a catch. Your learning wasn't meant to nurture your intellect or prepare you for independence. It was to make you a more valuable marriage prospect and a better reflection of your family's status. A noble girl's education typically included reading, writing, basic arithmetic, music, dancing, embroidery, household management, and possibly languages like French or Latin. This sounds reasonably comprehensive until you realize it was designed to make you decorative and useful rather than intellectually fulfilled. You'd learn to play the lute, not to express artistic passion, but to entertain guests in your future husband's home. You'd study languages, not for scholarly pursuits, but to converse politely with foreign diplomats. You'd master embroidery, not as creative expression, but to demonstrate the patience and precision expected of a well-bred wife. The rare Tudor woman who developed a true scholarly appetite faced significant barriers. Universities were exclusively male domains. Advanced texts in subjects like science, philosophy, or medicine were written in Latin, which most women weren't taught thoroughly. Access to books was limited by their expense and your family's willingness to indulge your unusual interest. Even the most educated Tudor women typically studied at home with tutors, rather than in schools or universities. This private education meant their learning depended entirely on their family's resources and attitudes. If your father was unusually progressive, like Sir Thomas More, who educated his daughters alongside his son, you might receive an exceptional education. If not, you were at the mercy of conventional wisdom, which held that too much learning made women argumentative and unsuitable as wives. Religion complicated matters further. The Tudor period spanned the English Reformation, bringing dramatic shifts in educational philosophy. Before the break with Rome, convent schools provided one of the few pathways for girls to receive formal education. When Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries, these opportunities vanished overnight. Protestant reformers did promote literacy for both sexes. Everyone should be able to read the Bible after all, but with different expectations. Boys were educated for public life and professions. Girls were educated primarily for domestic piety. The double standard was glaring. A man who studied was scholarly. A woman who studied was neglecting her proper duties. A few exceptional women managed to become genuinely learned. Lady Jane Grey was renowned for her mastery of languages. Catherine Parr wrote religious texts. And Elizabeth was fluent in multiple languages. But they were remarkable exceptions, not the rule. For most Tudor women, education was like a decorative border on a garment, pretty enough, but kept deliberately narrow and always secondary to the main fabric of their lives: marriage, children, and household management. So, if you found yourself in Tudor England with a hungry mind and curiosity about the universe, you'd better hope you were born into extreme privilege. And even then, prepare to fight against the prevailing belief that the greatest accomplishment your brain could achieve was remembering the correct spices for marchpane. If there's one thing that defined Tudor England beyond its monarchs, it was religious upheaval. And guess who bore the brunt of these spiritual whiplashings? Women, of course. You thought navigating modern religious discussions was tricky. Try doing it when the wrong prayer could get you burned at the stake. When the Tudor period began under Henry VIII, England was firmly Catholic. As a woman, your religious life was rigidly prescribed but relatively stable. You attended Mass regularly, confessed your sins to a priest, prayed to saints for intercession, and observed numerous holy days throughout the year. Then along came Henry VIII with his little marital problem. When the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry decided to become his own pope. The break with Rome in the 1530s set off religious changes that would swing back and forth like a pendulum for decades, with women often caught in the middle. Under Catholicism, you at least had female religious figures to identify with. The Virgin Mary provided a powerful female archetype, and female saints offered examples of women's spiritual power. Convents, while restrictive, provided one of the few spaces where women could exercise some authority and pursue education. The Protestant Reformation eliminated much of this. Mary's importance was diminished, saints were rejected as idolatrous, and convents were dissolved, forcing nuns to either marry or face destitution. One of the few institutional spaces where women held authority simply vanished. Protestant theology did offer some benefits for women. The emphasis on personal Bible reading in English rather than Latin made spiritual knowledge more accessible. The priesthood of all believers concept theoretically gave women's faith equal value to men's. The elevation of marriage over celibacy actually improved the status of wives somewhat. But in practice, new restrictions emerged to replace the old ones. If Catholicism had controlled women through confession and penance, Protestantism controlled them through intensely patriarchal family structures. The husband became the spiritual head of the household, responsible for his wife's religious instruction and moral behavior. The theological shifts were just part of the chaos. The real danger came from trying to navigate rapidly changing religious laws. Under Henry VIII, you could be executed for being too Catholic. Under his daughter, Mary I, you could be burned for being too Protestant. Under Elizabeth I, you needed to be publicly Anglican, while your private beliefs remained your own risky business. Imagine trying to keep your family safe during these swings. The prayer book you taught your children from last year could now be evidence of heresy. The saints you named your daughters after were now considered superstitious nonsense, or vice versa. Religious adaptability wasn't just spiritually confusing, it was a survival skill. Women faced unique religious persecution too. The witch hunts that would intensify after the Tudor period were already beginning, disproportionately targeting older women, widows, healers, and those who somehow defied social norms. Religious uncertainty created perfect conditions for scapegoating, and women made convenient targets. Tudor women also carried the spiritual burden of their gender's inherent sinfulness. Eve's original sin was used to justify women's subordination in both Catholic and Protestant teachings. Sermons regularly reminded women of their moral weakness and need for male guidance. Religious texts encouraging wifely submission were read at your wedding, taught to you as a girl, and repeated throughout your life. The good Tudor woman was expected to be devoutly religious, but never too opinionated about her faith. Spiritual enthusiasm in women was suspicious. It could look like seeking authority beyond your station. Female religious writers like Anne Askew were tortured and executed for promoting their views too boldly. Yet, despite these constraints, religion also offered Tudor women one of their few sources of power and expression. Through religious patronage, charitable works, and domestic religious instruction, some women carved out spheres of influence that would otherwise have been denied them. Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's sixth wife, wrote religious texts. Lady Margaret Beaufort, Henry VII's mother, was a significant religious patron. Countless unknown women maintained religious practices in their homes, preserving traditions or embracing new ones according to their convictions. So while Tudor religion was dangerous, shifting ground for women, it was also sometimes the only soil in which they could plant their own authority. When almost every other avenue for expression was closed, faith remained one realm where a woman's inner life was her own, even if expressing it too publicly could still get her killed. Think modern beauty standards are tough. The Tudors would like a word. Beauty in Tudor England wasn't just about looking good. It was a moral imperative, a status symbol, and sometimes a slow-acting poison, all wrapped into one pale, lead-covered package. The ideal Tudor beauty had skin as white as snow, cheeks as red as blood, and hair as yellow as gold. Basically, Snow White with blonde highlights. This wasn't just aesthetic preference. It was deeply rooted in class distinction. Pale skin signified a life of leisure indoors, away from manual labour in the sun. The whiter you appeared, the higher your social status. To achieve this coveted pallor, women applied ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar, to their faces, necks, and décolletage. Yes, actual lead, the same toxic metal we now carefully remove from paint and gasoline. Tudor women were smearing it directly onto their largest organ. This potent poison would be absorbed through the skin, causing headaches, nausea, abdominal pain, and eventually more serious conditions, like kidney failure, neurological damage, and infertility. But the beautiful corpse look wouldn't be complete without those blood-red cheeks and lips. For this, women turned to vermilion, mercuric sulfide, or red ochre, iron oxide, mixed with beeswax. Mercury poisoning added tremors, psychosis, and drooling to the lead poisoning symptoms you were already enjoying. What price beauty? Hair presented its own challenges. That coveted golden blonde shade could be achieved through a concoction of sulfur, alum, honey, and lye applied to the hair and left to bake in the sun. The process was smelly, caustic to the scalp, and often resulted in hair damage or loss. But at least you could temporarily achieve that Elizabeth Warrens-esque golden glow. If you weren't naturally blessed with a high forehead, another beauty standard of the time, you might pluck your hairline back several inches. This practice, popular among the nobility, often resulted in permanent hair loss over time. But looking like you had a giant brain was apparently worth the sacrifice. Eyebrows? Barely there. The fashion was for very faint, thin brows, the opposite of today's bold look. Some women even used bandages soaked in vinegar and cat dung to remove unwanted hair. The resulting infections were just a bonus, I suppose. Teeth were a particular challenge in an era without dentistry. Tooth blackening from sugar consumption became so common among the wealthy that it was occasionally considered fashionable, a bizarre, if you can't beat it, embrace it approach to dental decay. Elizabeth I's teeth were reportedly so black and decayed that foreign ambassadors struggled to understand her speech. For those aiming to keep their teeth either white or at least in their mouths, popular tooth powders contained everything from crushed cuttlefish bones to brick dust. The bathing situation didn't help matters. Full body bathing was rare, considered by many to be dangerous to health, as it supposedly opened the pores to disease. Most people made do with spot cleaning of visible areas, relying on frequent changes of linen undergarments to absorb body oils and sweat. The resulting body odour was masked with heavy perfumes, pomanders, scented balls carried or worn, and herb-scented clothing. What makes Tudor beauty standards particularly insidious is that they weren't just about fashion, they were moral.